So, this session is how to understand risk. First up, quick introduction. My name is David Chryson Offord. I am the Senior Information Security Consultant here at the University of Edinburgh. I used to work for the government. I used to work for the Department for International Development, and prior to that, the Department for Work and Pensions. I've held roles such as Information Assurance Architect and also worked within security architecture. I am a massive bad movie fan. The picture that you see in front of you is of me dressed as the Master from the film Manos, the Hands of Fate, which is an astoundingly bad film, and I thoroughly recommend it to anyone who needs a good laugh. If you need to get in contact with me for any reason, you can do so at david.chrysonofford@ed.ac.uk, or if you wish to contact the information security team, you can do so at informationsecurity@ed.ac.uk. Again, for ease of reference, I'm just going to dump the email address into the chat window because you can't pull it directly from the slides. Yay. All right, so let's get to the topic. Right, so the internet is scary. The internet is full of things like scams and hacking and questionable content and the dark web and ransomware. So with all these sort of different threats against us, how do we understand what is going on and how do we understand the risks that we're actually under? And on that basis, how much we should be doing to mitigate these risks. So how can we use understanding risk? Well, for starters, understanding risk is a key part of critical thinking. Should I go to that party or should I spend my evening on this assignment? You are processing risk. You are going, okay, what's the risk that I won't get the assignment done? Will it affect my grades? What are the consequences? Do I understand the consequences of decisions that I am making, both good and bad, and the likelihood that either may come up? On a personal level, we analyze risk basically all the time, and it helps us make our decisions and it helps us also build habits. So key questions I hope people are asking themselves are things like, do I install anti-malware on my laptop? Do I put it on my phone? Do I pay for a premium service or do I use a free one? How much am I willing to invest in terms of time and money into backing up my important data? What's the likelihood that this person contacts me unprompted is looking to scam me out of money or information? So these are the questions. What we're looking at is how we process those. So what is risk? Well, risk comes from threat in the first instance. But the definition of risk runs, risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, which is really accurate and really painfully vague. A better definition breaks there we go. And it can address, create, or result in opportunities and threats. Arnab, can you hear me again now? Okay, good. Right. Okay. Sorry, that's just the connectivity on my end suddenly dropped. So hopefully everything should remain stable for the rest of the talk. So that's an effect. Objectives can have different aspects and categories. Basically, an objective is anything you want it to be. What are you looking for? And risk is usually expressed in terms of risk sources, threats, potential events, so things that could happen based on that threat, their consequences, be they good or bad, and the likelihood of them triggering. So let's have a look. What is a threat? Now, the threat is an origin of an impact. And in order to really drill down into that, you need to be specific, understood, and vaguely quantifiable. So in information security terms, bad people, while a threat is not a really credible one we can examine. Bad people who want to steal my laptop is a much more specific, understood, and vaguely quantifiable threat, and one that we can therefore actually look at the risk of and think of in terms of how we can mitigate it. So if you want to think about threats without basically running around like a hedged chicken and losing your mind, you need to drill it down into more specific terms. So we have a rough idea what risk is, we know what a threat is. Before we look at how we handle risk, we need to discuss the topic of risk appetite. So where we have risk and the understanding of risk and where we're making decisions, we know the likelihood and impact of something, and on that basis, we know the payoff. Risk appetite is basically how people react to risk, all other things being equal. So where risk and payoff are in balance, a risk-averse person or a slightly paranoid one will never take a risk. They would always much rather have the sure thing. A risk-neutral person has a 50-50 chance of taking a risk if there's a 50-50 chance of them winning. They are entirely mathematically neutral. These people do not entirely exist because there's always some degree of bias in one way or another, but aiming for risk neutrality is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. Risk-seeking or complacent individuals who'll just take risks regardless will always take a risk. And this is where you get slightly more reckless behavior. This is where you get people who do things like indulge in gambling addiction and whatnot. Risk-seeking behavior always wants to push further. Now, the university is a really interesting place because it has what's called its risk appetite statement, which is a document that outlines the different types of risk that the university is exposed to as a whole, and whether or not it is actually risk-seeking or risk-averse for each of those categories. So in the category of the university's reputation, the university is very risk-averse. We take great pride in our standing as a university, and therefore we will do whatever we can to try and protect that. When it comes to research, we're actually quite risk-seeking. So if there is a potential that a research project may fail, we might lose some money or whatever, we generally want to try anyway. And this is actually, pretty normal for an academic institution, especially one with a focus on research. So risk appetite can vary massively depending on context, but it's useful to take a step back and think about yourself and go, right, what is my risk appetite? Do I like to take risk, or do I tend to back away from it and go for a sure thing? So, risk process. The risk process is how we take what we've looked at before, threat, likelihood, impact, and boil that down into understanding what the risk is and what we then do from there. Now, this diagram, which looks like someone dancing to Walk Like an Egyptian by the Bangles, is the best way to go about that. So first up, you have a threat. And based on that threat, there is a likelihood that something bad will happen, and there is the impact of that bad thing. These together form what is known as inherent risk. It's called inherent risk because at this point, we have done nothing to stop it. So for instance, if we were worried, say that we were going to be hacked and ransomware put on a machine, the inherent risk value would be we have done nothing to stop that. At that point, you get a decision. You can accept the risk and just do the thing, no mitigation. You can stop and not do the thing because, hey, there's risk, this is dangerous, why would we carry on? So it's one other way to go. Or you can mitigate. And the most often decision in a number of things is mitigate, because what we do when we mitigate is we go, right, okay, what's an action we can take that can change the risk, either by lowering likelihood or reducing impact, and how will that then feed back into that risk value, creating what's known as residual risk. So, fun diagram. Let's go through some live examples. So, the example I gave originally was ransomware. So, the threat is organized crime is trying to get ransomware onto my system to lock it down and then get me to pay them money to get access to it again. What's the likelihood of this? Assuming I do nothing. Well, the likelihood is probably sitting somewhere around medium. They have to get up my computer, they have to get whatever it is on there, they have to do the thing. So we just have to see how it goes from there. What is the impact? Well, if they do that, it will completely destroy all my data, which includes some quite important things. So for me, I would say high. What's the inherent risk then? Well, I would say high. On the basis that the impact is just so grievous, I couldn't bear to let that happen. So, with that in mind, do I accept? Do I not use my computer ever again? Or do I mitigate? Well, I think I'm going to want to keep using my computer, so I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to accept it because really that's kind of scary and I probably should be doing something about it. So let's have a look at one of the things I can do. So we pick a mitigation action, for in this example, anti-malware. Anti-malware will reduce the residual risk to medium if I use it, because it will help reduce the likelihood and in some cases reduce impact. Now, that's really handy. The thing you have to think about there is the cost. So is it worth my time and effort to reduce the risk by that much? Do I, go ahead with the mitigation? In this case, yes. You can get decent anti-malware for free. You can get good anti-malware if you wanted to put your hand in your pocket and pay a little bit for it. Why wouldn't you? And on that basis, we mitigate, we get to a residual risk and we go, right, okay, I'm now happy to move ahead. I accept. So the next example we have is scams. Now, scams work slightly differently in that they're not targeting your machine, they're targeting you. So this is organized crime. Again, they're looking to trick you into giving them money or information. What is the likelihood of being confronted with a scam? I've put medium. It probably should be high because they are everywhere. What's the impact? Medium. It's money. There are already existing things in place where you can get help. You might be able to get it back. So we've put medium for now. Medium in most risk analysis, dirty secret of the industry, is most people's default for I don't know. The inherent risk, bam, medium. Okay, fine. So what are our mitigations against being scammed by organized crime? Well, there's education. We can find out more about how these scams take place and know how to detect them ourselves and how not to fall for them. We could put email filters and anti-spoofing in place on all our sort of email accounts. And we can have financial controls. So we can have a number of different controls set up with our bank or with our payment authority, blocking anything that they see as being outside our usual behavior. On that basis, do we accept, do we mitigate, or do we stop? Now, I would argue for mitigation. In this case, education. So by knowing a little bit more about different scams and how they work, and that talk was yesterday, sorry, we'll be doing that one again as the year goes on as part of our normal series of information security talks, so do keep an eye out. I would say yes, education. And what education does is it reduces the likelihood, but not the impact. If you get scammed, you're still going to get hit just as hard, regardless of how educated you are, but it's harder for you to get caught out. So it specifically targets one area of that risk score. So it reduces the residual risk. Christina, fantastic question. If it is possible to mitigate, isn't it almost always the way to go? The answer is not necessarily. And I'll give the example that I use in a number of different talks of I have a fiver. It is my most precious fiver. I want to protect it more than anything. So I give it to my friend who locks it in a safe and drops it to the bottom of the ocean. And my fiver is safe. No one can get to it. However, I can't either. The cost to me now of getting back to my fiver is far more than any gain I would have had just by keeping my fiver somewhere relatively safe. So there are examples where you could put in a huge amount of security and a huge amount of effort, but the actual payback would not be enough of a reduction in risk that it's worth doing. And those are the situations where mitigation isn't always the way to go. Sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and accept, or accept that what you're trying to do is not necessarily the best idea and just back out of it. So, final example, physical theft. So, opportunist criminal goes and steals your laptop. This is an organized crime. What's the likelihood of this happening? Depending on how often you take your computer out with you, probably medium. Impact, medium again. I don't know what's on it. I'm hoping you have backups somewhere else. What's the inherent risk then? It is medium. So what are our mitigations? We could have locks. We could literally lock our devices to the table using what's called a Kensington lock. You could keep it in a secure bag. You could give people training and teach them to look out for thieves and whatnot. You could have encryption on your devices. You could have access control on your devices so people can't log into them. So what do? Do we accept and go, yeah, stuff will get stolen, we shouldn't do anything? Do we mitigate or do we stop? Now, in this case, the mitigation I've decided to highlight is encryption. If you encrypt the information on your device, so basically encrypt the entire hard drive using basically a lot of the sort of different technologies that are available. I know Apple does it automatically. Android phones, since Android, I think 6 have been doing it automatically as well. Then if your device is stolen, they won't be able to just pull the hard drive out and get the information that's on them easily. So your device is still gone, but at least your information is safe. And if you can get your information back from somewhere else, things could be worse. So what this does is this reduces the impact, not the likelihood. So it's the exact opposite of what we were looking at before. So it doesn't help with anything like that, but it gives you that space. So do we accept? Do we mitigate more or do we stop? In this particular case, I would probably mitigate more. I would also say, make sure that you've got a little bit of an idea how to avoid theft, maybe put additional access control on the device. But again, that's because these things are not necessarily expensive. They may well be in terms of time and effort, because the effort of putting all this stuff in place, remembering new passwords, adding longer passcodes, might be more than you're willing to go through. And that is very much down to your individual risk appetite. The choice, as they say, is yours. So, what people worry about. This is a lightning round, so this is basically where I'm going to blitz through a bunch of things. So in the last couple of minutes, and then open up for questions and observations. So, social media compromise. Is it likely that someone's going to break into my account on social media if you're not protecting it properly and you're doing things like reusing passwords and whatnot? Yes, it is. Is it easy to mitigate against that? Yes, it is. Use unique passwords, possibly some kind of password manager. Turn on two-factor authentication if you're willing to make that effort. Please be willing to make that effort. And yeah, for the most part, it's much harder to compromise you from then on in. Zoom bombing. We're doing remote learning. We're having these meetings. What are the risks of people jumping in and putting all kinds of horrible images in them? Well, yes, there is a risk of that. So what do? We mitigate, we put different controls in place, and we go, right, okay, that makes things a bit easier. Is there still a risk? Yes, actually there is, from inside our organization, that someone might go rogue and do something stupid. But at the end of the day, we just have to accept that. We have to trust our own staff. We have to trust our own students up to a certain point. Losing your assignments, coursework, or dissertation. This one's more fiddly. Someone goes, right, well, what happens if I lose my coursework? Well, how did you lose it? Is it due to hardware failure? Is it due to something getting stolen? Is it due to something getting wiped? So what are the threats? Where are you storing it? Are you storing it in the cloud? Are you storing it just on a device? Is it on a USB stick or something, which is so easily lost? And how often are you backing it up? This is a case of where someone has gone, here's this threat, and the threat's too vague. So you need to really bring that in and go, right, okay, what is the actual situation here, and understand it. And then know what you can do to make things better. Getting hacked by a nation state. Now, this one is an issue of scale. If you want to understand the risk of getting hacked by a nation state, you have to go, am I a government? Because if so, the likelihood is really high. The impact is pretty bad. Am I an organization such as a university, in which case the likelihood is less high than with a government, impact still really, really bad? Am I a sole individual, in which case the likelihood of being hacked by a nation state is actually really low? You're not who they're after unless you're really important or really influential. And the impact, if they decided to go for you, would be awful, but the likelihood is so low that you generally don't need to do much about that. You just accept it. Because there's no such thing as total elimination of risk. So, with that said, any questions? How to avoid being hacked. That is an entirely different talk. How to avoid being hacked very, very quickly. The information security team has a list of top 10 tips on how to do a lot of different things to avoid being hacked. I will go through, say, the top 3 of them. Update everything. Known vulnerabilities are one of the major ways people get hacked. Get smart about looking at your email and knowing whether or not they are trustworthy. So look for things like email addresses that don't add up to the name that it's coming from. Know how to examine links by either hovering over them or putting them through a secondary service. And don't open random attachments and the like. So, keep an eye out for that kind of thing. And finally, use two-factor authentication wherever you can. Use unique passwords everywhere. Reuse of passwords is a huge way people tend to get hacked at the moment due to what's called credential stuffing. So don't be that person, in short. Any other questions? Okay. While you think on, yep, and that is why you can use things such as password managers. My opinion on password managers is actually they're really, really useful. Do a bit of research, find a good one. The university actually provides free LastPass premium accounts to students. So look that up on the information security web pages. Let me just dig out the relevant link here. So that's the one that we actually support and use locally. We've got it rolled out across all our staff as well, which is incredibly useful. Will password managers be hacked? Possibly. So could your computer, so could every service you use. This is where we go, right, do we trust the security controls the password managers have put in place? And are they as strong as they can be? Now, the really good ones within the industry, and I've done a fair amount of research into a number of different ones, is yeah, for someone to crack those, it's going to take a monumental effort. And for the most part, they have processes in place which mean that the actual operators of those services do not get to see your passwords themselves. They get to see effectively the encrypted versions of them, but they don't get to see what they really are, and they don't know what the keys are because that's stored locally. Really useful. So, yeah, exactly. There is no such thing as a free lunch when it comes to risk, but they are far more secure than the controls you could probably set up on your own machine, unless, of course, you completely disconnect it from the entire internet, in which case, go you. So it's up to you. It depends on who you trust in terms of their infrastructure and everything they do. There is no easy answer.